I moved my family into a beautiful house that my father bought at auction for a very good price. Our new home was located in a small town that was only about 10 minutes from the largest city in the state, and it was actually better than any of the houses we had lived in before. This one had a large pool in the back and a small garden next to it. There was also a large tree in the backyard, which was filled with fragrant yellow flowers every spring. One of the main reasons why my parents decided on this house, besides the good price, is because it was also very close to the school, and it had a reputation of being a very safe place to live. So they were happy with this, since security is very important to my family and for a good reason. Last year, a couple of criminals broke into our old house in the middle of the night. These tied us up and gagged us, and besides terrorizing us with death threats, they stole much of our belongings and some money that my father had in the safe. This was obviously a traumatic experience, and the main reason why my parents decided to look for a different place to live. In addition, my parents also traveled a lot for work, so there were many occasions when I had to stay alone in the house. But since the incident I told you about, we had very strict security rules at home. One of them being that my dad had security cameras and alarms placed all around the new house, and there was no way anyone could enter undetected. At the back of the house, there was an old 3-story apartment. I always saw people on the first and second floors, but the third floor felt like no one stayed there. The third floor bedroom windows looked directly into the back of our house. This new neighborhood was a calm and quiet place, so I liked to relax in my house while my parents were on tour. One weekend, my parents had to travel to Los Angeles for a seminar, and I stayed home as usual. It was a Saturday night and all my new friends wanted to hang out at another classmate's house. I promised my parents not to stay out late, so after a couple of beers I came home as I had promised to do, even though I was having a great time. It was 9 p.m. and I wasn't sleepy at all, so I went upstairs and put on my bathing suit to go swimming in the pool. It was a hot summer night and it was perfect for a swim. I went down to the pool, poured myself a glass of freshly made orange juice and put on some music. I swam for a while, and then drank my juice lying on the pool raft. I must have fallen asleep at some point, and then I heard a noise and woke up. I looked around and saw no one. The back of the house was empty. There was no one around. At that moment, my eyes went to the third floor window of the building. There I saw a frail old woman standing in front of the window looking directly at me. Her eyes were so big that her gaze frightened me. I said nothing and looked at my watch. It was around 10 o'clock at night. I continued lying on my raft, and after a couple of minutes, when I looked over there again, she was not at the window. I was relieved and kept thinking how come I had never seen her before. I almost thought no one lived in the third floor apartment. That's when I heard my phone ring. It was inside the house. So I got up from the pool thinking it was my parents calling and was about to go inside when I heard a voice coming from behind me. I froze instantly. It was an old woman's voice. I slowly turned around and my heart choked in horror as I saw this creepy old woman standing right behind me. This really terrified and unsettled me, as I had no idea how she had gotten into my yard, as there was no way she could have gotten in undetected by the security system. Her cold death stare made my legs go numb. She was very close to me, so I literally could not move away even though I wanted to too badly. But instead I said in a halting voice, "Ma'am, how did you get in here?" I expected her to answer my question, but instead, something happened that made my blood run cold. She opened her toothless mouth slightly and said, "Annabelle, are you still here? Run away, Annabelle. Run away now, or your husband will come and bury you there." Then she raised her feeble hand and pointed toward the tree in our yard with her long, creepy fingers. A shiver ran through my whole body and I replied in an even shakier voice, "What? What is she saying?" She didn't answer, just continued to stare at the tree and then turned back to my face, and her mouth and eyes opened in an expression of horror. It was an absolutely horrible sight. And suddenly my phone rang again, and I ran away frantically and didn't stop until I got to my room. Once I got inside, I locked the door. My heart was pounding as my phone continued to ring, so I reached over and picked it up and saw that it was my dad. I answered the phone, and without being able to articulate a word, I was left crying terribly. While on the other end of the line, my dad asked me over and over again what was wrong with me. It was only after a few seconds when I was able to tell my dad what happened. He got really scared and called 911. The cops arrived after 10 minutes, and I told them that a crazy old lady from the nearby apartment came into our backyard and said some very strange things to me. These immediately went to the apartment building and asked the landlord about his tenants on the 3rd floor. But I was in absolute shock when the landlord said that that floor of the apartment had been empty for the last 15 years. But he also said that an old lady used to live on that floor a long time ago. She was sick and bedridden, so she spent most of the day sitting near that window inside the house. She would not come out of that dark room, and her children left her alone during her last days of life. She even died sitting near that window. The owner himself did her cremation rituals, as no family member came to claim the poor old lady's body. The next morning, when my parents arrived, I told her everything that had happened, and also the police lady who had stayed with me at the house since the night before. She explained to my parents that I might have had a bad dream or something, but while they were talking, something came to my mind. I asked my dad what the name of the previous owner of our house was, and he responded by saying that the bank had told him that a woman lived here with her husband before us, but they moved out of town and missed payments from the bank, which is why the property had been confiscated and recently auctioned off. But he also pointed out that it was 15 years ago. My heart started pounding, and my look of terror must have been so evident that the policeman asked me what, if anything, happened to me. So I told him that the old lady addressed me as Annabelle and warned me that my husband would bury under the tree. They both seemed quite surprised, and the police even asked for permission to search our backyard. My father granted it, and the next day they started digging under the tree. To our horror, as soon as they started digging, the bones of a human being began to emerge, which seemed to have been buried there for many years, as they were completely white. We were all totally shocked, including the policemen themselves. The corpse had a ring on her left hand, and there were also some textile items at the site. The human remains were taken to the scientific headquarters of the local police and subjected to various tests, and a few days later, it became known that the remains belonged to a woman named Annabelle Dubroff, a 28-year-old woman who, together with her husband, was the former occupant of the house where my family and I now lived. It turns out that her husband had filed a missing persons report, but after filing the report, he too left the house and the city. Due to lack of evidence, the police could not find any details about her, nor did anyone come to the station to inquire about her whereabouts. But this must be because the woman was Ukrainian, had arrived in the country about 2 years ago, and had no Malia here. The autopsy report indicated that she had been murdered. The woman had been struck with a blunt object to the back of the head. The policeman instantly suspected that it was her husband who had murdered her and buried her under that tree. But to this day they are still searching for her husband. I'm almost certain that the old lady saw this whole incident from her bedroom window, but she couldn't tell anyone. Although people find it hard to believe, I think the old lady died feeling guilty about what happened. But I wondered why she had come to me, why not to my mom or dad? Because I was completely sure that it had been her ghost that I had seen that night. However, this doubt would be cleared up for me only a few days later, when the police made public the news of the macabre discovery, and a photograph of her was published in the local newspaper along with the whole story. This is something that still to this day has my parents and me very shocked, because this woman was identical to me. That is probably why the spirit of the old woman came to warn me. She thought I was Annabelle. We still live in the same house to this day, but I have never seen that old lady again. This story happened to me last year and was my encounter with one of the oldest unsolved mysteries in Texas state history, the famous Marfa lights. It may not be as scary as some of the other stories presented here, but this was a unique experience for me and really very disturbing. For those of you who have no knowledge of the subject, I'll put it in context. Some nights, when looking across the West Texas desert outside the town of Marfa, strange red, white, or yellow orbs can be seen. These lights seem to hover above the desert floor and have, for decades, been the subject of all sorts of stories. You may see just one or two, or sometimes several in the air at once. Sometimes they float perfectly still before they begin to flicker or move, even shooting flashes across the night sky. Stories about this phenomenon are many and date back to the 1800s. There are even Native American legends about the mysterious lights, and many researchers have been conducted around this phenomenon. Studies have been conducted to try to determine its origin, but most have been unsuccessful, since it has not been possible to determine for sure what produces the phenomenon, or at least not in a scientific way. The main theory is that the unique atmospheric conditions in that region of Texas cause the headlights of automobiles to reflect in the sky. But many people do not believe this to be true, especially since the phenomenon has been sighted even when there has been no traffic. And as I said before, its sightings date back to times when there were not even vehicles with bright headlights in that area. Now, having said that, let's go with what happened to me. I was on a trip with some college friends out west. Our intention was simply to experience the beauty of the Chihuahuan desert culture, but once there we heard so many stories that we decided to visit the viewing area, which was about 10 miles outside the small town of Marfa. One of my great hobbies is bird watching, so when we embarked on the trip I brought my big telescope, which I now plan to use to see the lights better. We arrived about half an hour after sunset. If you have never been far out in the desert, I must tell you that it really gets dark out there. And I mean really dark, that is. The only source of light in that place were the dim lights on the steps of the observation area, the stars, and a single cell phone tower that could be seen in the distance. I set up my scope and we positioned it on the cell tower. We didn't have to wait long before a small white light appeared in the distance. It moved slowly along the horizon line before it began to flicker. Then another and another appeared. Sometimes they would go out after a minute. Other times they would be visible for about 5 or more minutes. But each time I focused my scope on one, I was never able to see any discernible feature other than a small flash of light. Another strange thing to note was that no matter how many times I turned the zoom, the lights never appeared larger than when we looked at them with the naked eye. I found this really strange and disturbing, as I couldn't come up with a logical explanation for it, but I didn't want to give it a second thought. We stayed about an hour at the site, and I was absolutely fascinated by the little lights that seemed to have a life of their own. But that wasn't the only time we would see them on that trip. A couple of days later, we were returning from a hike in Big Bend. It was a long drive back, as I recall. It was pretty dark when we got back to Marfa. Driving through the desert at night is surreal. You can go hundreds of miles and see almost nothing. It's like the whole world fades out of existence beyond the reach of the headlights. As we passed the observation deck, we saw about half a dozen white, red, and yellow lights in the desert, the most we had seen at one time. But when the whole thing got weird was when I turned around in my seat and saw a small reddish light behind us. It was just one, so I didn't think anything of it at all, and from my best angle I guess I could make sure it was about half a mile behind us. maybe 25 or 50 feet off the ground. I thought it might have been a motorcycle, but then it started moving perpendicular to the straight road we were on. That's when I started looking at it more closely. The little light followed us for about 10 minutes, and I could assure that it kept the same distance between us and it during the whole journey, before making a turn and suddenly disappearing in the air. We were all completely perplexed. We were somewhere between fascinated and intrigued, and yes, also a little scared. After all, it is a natural human instinct when faced with something you don't understand, or for which you have no answers, as in this case. None of us had ever seen anything like it, and two of the people in the car had been there several times. I personally have seen the lights many times, but never anything like it. We didn't feel threatened by it, but it was an unsettling experience that many people probably have never had in their lives. If any of you are in West Texas, be sure to stop by Marfa and see if you can catch a glimpse of these strange lights. People have speculated that these things may be ghosts, aliens, car lights, or even electricity caused by the rocks under the area. But I really hope the mystery of the Martha lights is never solved. We need a few more mysteries in the world, and this one is really fascinating. I went to college in a small town in northern Colorado. I moved there in the fall of 2008, and I moved there right after one of the worst crimes that has ever taken place in the area. This event shook the entire community from top to bottom, but the craziest part of it all is that I actually moved into a house just 2 doors down from where it all happened. I was living with my grandparents at the time, and they were really shocked. I can remember my grandfather sitting at his desk, standing guard until 2 or 3 in the morning every night with a glass of whiskey in one hand, and his old gun very close to the other. My grandfather is a Vietnam War veteran who takes security very seriously, so after that crime spree he simply reverted to his survival instincts. I was new in town when all the information was in full swing, so the whole community was in complete shock, and basically everything at that time revolved around what was going on, so it was a little hard to follow. I'll give you a preamble before I go on. In town there were 3 boys who ran together and were known to cause a lot of trouble in town, and when I say trouble, I mean criminal behavior. Their names were Danny, BJ, and Steve, who was the oldest of them all and was 18 years old at the time. To me, these names meant absolutely nothing, but to the townspeople they were well known and usually the first to be singled out for just about any of the basic crimes that occurred in the place. From what I gathered, it seemed that these 3 had been on a bit of a roll in the last few months, created a lot of destruction, but in reality these guys were nothing more than a trio of troubled teenagers who didn't get past doing some petty theft and some vandalism. However, they believed that they were really a dangerous criminal gang, so they needed to get out of town and outwit the law. This was all in their heads, since they were teenagers 15, 16, and 18. Nothing they were doing was really that bad. Still, they convinced themselves that they were career criminals and were about to run away. So they started looking for the things they thought they would need for their escape, starting with cash. For this purpose, the boys began a series of nighttime robberies that led them to get a small pile of cash, but they also stole some valuables and a gun. Danny got the gun from a box he stole from an abandoned house and handed it to the group. From there, they felt they had hit it big. They could start robbing people for real. I think they were within the same 72 hours of stealing the gun when they broke into a house in the middle of the night with the intention of taking everything of value, but they didn't expect to find Bobby and his wife asleep in bed. This was something they were not prepared for, so they were trapped. But now they had a weapon, so they ordered Bobby and his wife to lie on the floor, but Bobby was not intimidated, on the contrary. He got out of bed and approached the boys, telling them to get out of his house at once. Nervous about the situation and emboldened by the gun they had, One of the boys pulled the trigger without hesitation, and Bobby took the bullet in the chest and died instantly. His wife stayed in bed and just watched it all happen, which was easily the most tragic part of the story. The boys immediately realized the grave mistake they had just made. They had just fired a gun in the middle of the night in a township with less than 14,000 residents. They had already raised enough money to get out of the city, and if they had chosen to do it that night, they would not have been targeted. They would probably never have been arrested or chased, but they decided to do one more robbery, and now their scenario was notoriously more complicated. It was at this point that they realized the small errors in their initial escape plan, and that is that they had no means of transportation, nor did they have the option of taking a bus or a cab. Now they had committed a serious crime, and by that time everyone around them was probably on alert, as the gunshot must have been heard several blocks away, as well as the screams of Bobby's wife when she saw her husband fall dead on the floor. The boys fled the house and remained in the shadows for the next few days. No one knew where they were. The police searched tirelessly for them but did not find them. By the time I arrived in town, 3 days had passed since Bobby's murder, and there was still no trace of his killers, so the whole community was on alert. I remember coming home from college one day, and when I got home, I saw a patrol car parked out front and a couple of officers talking to my grandfather. The first thing that came to my mind was that the officers were trying to investigate nearby houses. However, upon arrival, the men called my name and asked me to accompany them. This really took me by surprise. I looked at my grandfather and he nodded his head as a sign for me to do as I was asked, so I made my way to the station with the officers. Once there, they began to question me. They asked me questions about the boys and if I knew them. They also asked me how long I had been in town and my reasons for moving there. I answered honestly, although I felt a little nervous without knowing exactly why. Maybe just being taken into a room and interrogated for a crime makes you feel progressively like a criminal. I actually went to high school with them, but only for a couple of years, before I moved to the city with my mother and finished high school there. I won't say they were good kids or anything like that, but when I heard what they did, I was shocked. I mean, these were the kind of kids that would shoot spitballs in class, make loud noises to distract the teacher. It was hard to imagine them breaking into someone's house and murdering them. We were all in shock at what happened, especially when all the details came out. They stole a gun, broke into a house and attacked a sleeping elderly couple. It was as if we were discussing details of a case in Los Angeles or New York, something completely foreign to this old Colorado town. Once the interrogation was over, the policeman let me go, but not before reminding me that if I had any information or if I saw them at any time, I should let them know without hesitation. They stressed to me that these 3 boys were dangerous and that they should be taken off the streets immediately. Later that night, I was in my room studying for an exam I had the next day, when suddenly there was a power outage. I quickly reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight and made my way downstairs. The electrical box for the house was in the basement, so I was about to head down there to check. However, when I was just a few steps away, I heard gunshots and screams. I immediately jumped back and instinctively called my grandfather. I didn't hear an answer right away, but a few minutes later I heard him calling me from the basement. I ran down there, and as I opened the door and went downstairs, I couldn't believe my eyes. The first thing I saw was my grandfather with a bullet wound in his arm, but a few steps away from him, Danny's body was lying, and further away, BJ and Steve were lying face down and with their hands on their heads, both shot in the leg. My grandfather asked me to call the police immediately, and also an ambulance. They didn't even take 10 minutes to arrive. They took the 3 of them away in the ambulance, and my grandfather was taken to make a statement. Long story short, these 3 guys had been staying in the basement of our house for the past 3 days. However, the moment the electricity failed, my grandfather headed down to the basement to check the electrical box. fortunately with his gun in his hand as he had been for the past few days. When he got there, he pointed the flashlight, and that's when he came face to face with the three crooks. Danny fired a couple of shots at him, but only managed to hit him in the arm. However, my grandfather is quite an experienced marksman, and he was much faster than him or them. He shot Danny in the abdomen, and the other two he shot in each leg to neutralize them, and that was just the moment I arrived. After the incident, my grandfather was acquitted of all charges for acting in self-defense, while these boys were sentenced to several years in prison, with Danny getting the most years, because he was the one who pulled the trigger on both occasions, when Bobby was killed, and he was also the one who shot my grandfather. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. My mother worked 2 jobs in order to support us, as when I was 7 years old, my dad left my mom and never returned, and my brother, unfortunately, has autism. But unlike others, he is actually a little better in his condition, although he rarely speaks or expresses himself like a normal person. But despite this, he is able to do his basic tasks. Most of the day, he sits by the window looking out, saying or doing nothing else. This incident occurred when I was 15 years old and my brother Frank was 11. My mom was working a night shift on a Wednesday, so it was basically just my brother and I at home that day. We were kind of used to being left alone at night because we had no choice. My mom had to work 2 shifts in order to cover household expenses and couldn't afford to pay for a babysitter. Our next-door neighbor was an alcoholic man who had a son close to my age, but we would often hear the man yelling at his son late at night, and sometimes we would even hear banging. This particular night, I was sitting in our living room and watching TV. My brother was upstairs lying in his bed, and suddenly I heard a lot of chaos outside. I opened the door and saw that 3 or 4 people had gathered in front of our neighbor's house, and within 5 or 10 minutes a policeman arrived. They sealed the whole house in seconds. The paramedics even came out and carried a body on a stretcher, and behind them, there was our neighbor, the father, getting into an ambulance with a bleeding head. At first I couldn't understand what was going on, but after listening to the conversations of the people gathered in front of the scene, it gave me a clear idea of what had just happened. It turns out that the father called 911, saying that a homeless man broke into their home and tried to rob them, hit him with a baseball bat and seriously injured him. As he was drunk, he simply fell to the ground in terrible pain in his head. The father saw his son running towards the man to stop him, and it was just as the man hit his son in the back of the head and he fell to the ground. According to the father's account, the man then stole his wallet and some electronics and fled the scene. The policeman registered the father's complaint, but after suffering a huge blood clot inside his brain, his son died in the hospital. That night, our whole town was shaken with fear. No one expected such a terrible tragedy in such a peaceful place. The father organized a small funeral for his son, and we all attended. Everyone gave their condolences. The local sheriff assured him that he would find the guy who destroyed his family. My mother was completely terrified and asked Grandma to keep an eye on us during her night shifts. There was a huge commotion in our town because of this event. For his part, our neighbor, Mr. Fellman, had changed a lot after the death of his son. He was often seen sitting on the porch with a terrified look on his face. I could tell he seemed to be suffering from the trauma of that night every second. And no wonder, as that must have been a terrible moment. Having to watch your child die on the ground at the hands of an intruder and not being able to do anything is any parent's nightmare. Mr. Fellman stopped drinking after that incident. He also begged the sheriff to let him move out, as he was traumatized by living in that house. But the ongoing investigation forced him to stay where he was. But my neighbor was not the only one who experienced changes after that terrible tragedy. About a week after the incident, I began to notice strange behavior in my brother, although we never discussed the death of the boy next door for obvious reasons. I am sure my brother must have realized that something happened to our neighbors. After all, he was perfectly aware of what was going on around him, even if he could not express it effectively like anyone else. One day I was doing my schoolwork sitting in the living room. It was a rainy and dull afternoon, and like almost every day, Frank was sitting by the living room window and watching the raindrops fall, and suddenly I heard him laughing. I looked at him and saw that you were looking outside and laughing at something. The street and neighboring houses were visible from that window, so I asked him, "What's so funny?" Frank chuckled and told him and pointed out the window. And I immediately got up and walked over there, stood next to my brother and looked outside. Like I said, it was raining outside. The rain wasn't that heavy. That's why I could clearly see the empty stripe. As far as my eyes could see, I didn't see a single living creature outside. I thought to myself that Frank was probably imagining something, and I laughed about it with him. That night, when we all sat down to dinner, Frank surprised us all with a gesture he made. My mom served him some food and placed the plate in front of him to eat, but my brother got up and slowly went to the kitchen, then brought an extra plate and placed it on the table right next to him. "Why did you bring an extra plate?" my mom said. He looked next to him as if someone was sitting in the chair and started smiling on his own. The truth is that this made me feel very strange. I mean, his behavior was being quite bizarre. He had never done anything like that before, and it didn't make any sense. "Mom is asking you something," my mom told him. Then he looked at our mom and said, "He's hungry, Mom. Serve him too. He's hungry." My mom and I were absolutely flabbergasted by Frank's behavior. She replied quietly and calmly, "Who is he, Frank?" My brother chuckled and said, "My friend Edie." Mom and I thought that, like any normal child, Frank was having an imaginary friend, so that night we didn't react to his sudden strange behavior as he seemed happy, so we decided to play along. Frank often talked and smiled. Whenever anyone asked him, he would say he was talking to his friend Edie. Things never took a different turn, so my brother's behavior never bothered me in a big way. That was until one night I woke up in my room and heard footsteps coming down the stairs. My mom was sleeping downstairs while my brother and I had a room upstairs. I got out of my bed and went to check on Frank, but when I opened the door to his room, I saw that it was empty. So I ran downstairs and found the front door wide open. This scared me to death. I ran out and woke up my mom. Then we both left the house and started calling my brother. We called him for a while without receiving any answer. We also looked for him in the vicinity, but we couldn't find him. My mom was about to cry when we heard a sound of laughter coming from our backyard. We immediately ran over there, and that's when we saw Frank standing under a tree. He had his back to us. So I said to him in a cracked voice, "Frankie, are you okay?" Suddenly he turned towards us. I had never seen my brother like that. His eyes were blood red and his face was full of pain. He said in a harsh voice, "He's buried here." And then he collapsed on the ground. That night, my brother came down with a high fever, and the next morning we called many doctors, but no one could say exactly what was wrong with him. My mom became tense and worried. She hardly slept at night and was very stressed. One night I saw my mom talking to our town sheriff, who was standing in the doorway. After the sheriff left, I asked my mom what he was saying, and she replied that the sheriff was going to close the next door neighbor's file. They did a lot of investigating but could not locate the intruder who broke into their house that night. Hearing this, my eyes suddenly widened like saucers, and I asked my mom what was the name of Mr. Fellman's son. She answered, I think his name was Edie." "Why are you asking me?" My head started to throb with terror. Is this even possible? The imaginary friend my brother was talking about was none other than our neighbor's dead son. I ran to Frank's room and he was mumbling something in his sleep. I went up to him and said, Frank, is Edie here with you? Now you're just going to have to trust me. I'm not making this up at all. My brother suddenly opened his eyes and looked towards the corner of the room. As I followed his eyes, my heart skipped a beat in fear. A person was standing in the darkness in the corner of Frank's room. His eyes were pale white with small pupils sprouting from them. Only his face was particularly visible as his whole body was in darkness. Spots of dried blood were visible on his cheek and the left side of his forehead. He then looked at me and my brother. Frankie slowly got up from his bed and then began to walk out of the room. I followed him downstairs while my mom was sitting in the living room. But suddenly she saw Frank walking alone in the middle of this fever and ran towards him. But before she could do anything else, I stopped her. I grabbed her arm and told her everything. Then my mom and I left the house following my brother, who was walking us towards the backyard. I stopped on the right, in front of the tree. This tree was in the middle of our backyard and the backyard of our neighbor, Mr. Fellman. Frank then pointed to the ground under the tree and said, "Dig here," and then passed out on the ground. Without wasting a single second, I told my mom to call the sheriff. She did so immediately, and he came with 2 other police officers. People from our neighborhood gathered in our backyard out of curiosity. Then, in front of all the neighbors, the cops started digging under the tree, and what they found still causes me nightmares to this day. There, under our tree, they found a bloody baseball bat wrapped in a cloth buried shallowly. Then the mystery unfolded, shocking our entire community once again. As you can imagine, it was not a homeless man, but Mr. Feldman himself, who murdered his own son in a drunken delirium. But to save himself from the law, he decided to make up the whole story of the robbery and hurt himself to make the situation more believable, and even secretly buried the murder weapon because he knew that without the murder weapon, no police would have caught the killer. That was the reason he wanted to move so badly. The police arrested him that day, and surprisingly, my brother was completely better the next day. We still live in that house, and I believe William has finally been able to rest in peace. We watched with my family in a small town in Ohio. My older brother and I would stay home inside. Ever since we moved there, my mother implemented a sort of rule in the house. After a certain time, she would take away our cell phones and hide them inside the safe. A safe that neither my brother nor I had the combination to. Only she did. This, she said, was to keep us grounded and not alienated all day in a virtual world. Although this seemed like a silly and arbitrary measure, it was Mom and Dad's rules, so there was little we could do about it. Our grandparents lived on the same street, and my great-grandmother lived in a little house they built on that same property, so she could feel more independent, but they would still be around to take care of her. Our parents told us they were going to go see my great-grandmother since our grandparents were out of town that day. They also told us that when they got back we would order pizza, which sounded good to 7-year-old me and my 14-year-old brother, who I will call Max. That afternoon, my brother and I played video games for quite a while, and soon we started to get hungry. I kept asking when our parents would be back. I would say that after about 2 hours of them leaving, we heard a knock on the driveway. I immediately got excited, thinking it was my parents with the pizza, so I ran downstairs and my brother followed close behind. I approached the door, which had a large window, only to find that it wasn't our parents. It was a very tall, thin white guy with short, scruffy black hair. I'd say maybe 24 or 25 years old. The man was quite jarring because everyone knew everyone in this small town and we had no idea who he was. I raised my finger for about a second at him and then closed the curtain. I turned to see Max looking at the door with a look of disbelief because he had seen this person too. A few seconds later, that knock turned into a pounding, and then it turned into shaking and rattling of our doorknob. Now we were terrified and with no way to call our parents. Max grabbed my hand and pulled me into the kitchen. There he grabbed a knife, and I distinctly remember it snapping in his hand. It broke on the small blade and fell out of the handle. At that time, for some reason, our kitchen was very shabby. A lot of rusty utensils and things were matted, and there were all kinds of broken things. All kinds of things and in disrepair. However, seeing that we didn't have too much to defend ourselves with, we both hid inside the laundry room and hugged each other, even hearing those knocks on the door. The banging continued for about 5 minutes, but to us it felt like hours. Then we listened in terror as the front door opened. One thing I will say about my brother is that he has always been ready to protect me at any time. So, in this situation, he was ready to jump on whoever was there and stick that crappy knife in him just to defend me. However, it was my mother rounding the corner holding 2 pizza boxes and some soda, wondering why her 2 sons were in that corner with their faces full of tears on the floor. We both stood up and ran to tell her about that man we saw outside, but were met with laughter, and then we saw that my dad was outside talking to him. He said he was inquiring about buying a broken-down car that has been in the driveway for a few months. Apparently he was a mechanic. My mom felt terrible but found the situation a little funny. Apparently she came out and told the man what we told him, and he said he felt really bad for scaring us. Then we got hugs and promised us the phones were not locked up. They didn't give them back when they left again. I spent the rest of the night eating pizza with choking sobs. Something was still bothering me. Although it was not clear to me as a child if I could feel that anyone was okay. Why would a grown man knock on the door like that? He would shake the handle and do everything he could to get into the house. I mean, if you see a child raise his finger and make a gesture like looking for a grown person to come open, why would you have to start forcing the door? That made no sense. And somehow my childish mind knew it. Besides, why would someone come in the middle of the night to ask about selling a vehicle that didn't have any kind of sign advertising that it was for sale? It's a little scary to think about my parents ignoring this completely, just like that. But something in my gut, especially being an adult now, told me that's not the way adults, at least normal adults, act. The guy's name ended up being Hugo. He came by the house a few more times that week to inspect that old beat-up car. The first time he stopped by, our parents were home, so he popped the hood and got under it, checked just about everything. From what I can remember, everything was, I guess, friendly that first visit, except sometimes I noticed him looking at me and my brother, giving us this weird, creepy smile. He came by a few days later that same week. But the next time it was at a weird time again, and our parents weren't home now that we knew this guy. So Max opened the door for him and he said, "Hey, sorry to bother you, but I'd like to check something else on the car." "No problem, but our parents aren't here, so you have to come back tomorrow," Max explained. "Oh, it's really no big deal. I just wanted to check the tires and wheel wells real quick. It won't take any time at all." Like I said, we already knew the guy, so Max saw nothing wrong with letting him do what he said he was going to do. Then he closed the door and we watched him from the living room window as he went back to his own car, another old jalopy that looked like it was coming apart. He rummaged around inside, then walked over to the other wagon he wanted to buy, and proceeded to do exactly what he said he was going to do. After a few minutes we got bored, left the window and continued doing what we were doing. However, he did something strange that immediately caught our attention. He turned around and walked straight into the house, taking pictures of the outside. He took pictures of the sides, the front, the second floor, and then went to the backyard. That's when he noticed us looking wide-eyed through the front window. There he put the camera away and waved, then pointed to the front door as if to suggest we meet him there. Max came over and told me to stand by the phone in case something happened. He put in Dad's number, so I only had to press the call button. Then he told me to call 911 and then Dad. They talked for a minute at the door. before Max closed it again and came back. He was white as a sheet of paper at that point. He looked like a ghost. He didn't look the same. I asked him what had happened and if I should call, and he shook his head, no. To this day, I still don't know what that guy said to Max, as he has always been secretive about it. But he has definitely intrigued me for years, especially with my imagination running wild with all kinds of theories. Once my parents got home, he said something to them. I remember my dad went to his office to call Hugo, and he did it very angrily. We could hear his very stern voice through the door, but eventually he softened, hung up, and went back out. He then explained to us that it was some sort of misunderstanding, much like that first experience we had with him. But he was taking pictures of the house, I told my dad. But he quickly gave me this funny look and said something like, Hugo just took pictures of the house with one of those paper cameras. Max immediately backed me up in my concern. Then my dad explained that that would be some sort of toy cameras that used wrapping paper, or something like that. I understood. The thing is, Dad dismissed it completely and told us that he would talk to him later, but that he would not call him back that night. After that, he watched us go to sleep. Max and I looked at each other and reluctantly went to bed. I remember lying there in the dark for most of my night, staring at the window, wondering if I would see a flash come in through the blinds. Why on earth would he do that? Why would he take pictures of our house? Max had his own theory about it. He thought he did it in order to have an outside layout of all the entrances and exits, and I guess in my kid brain that made sense. But it really freaked me out. The next time Hugo came over, it was the following Monday. I was actually home alone. Max and I got out of school at about the same time. We rode the bus home as usual, but when we got off, he opened the door for me, dropped me off at home, and walked a couple of blocks to his friend's house. It wasn't very unusual for him to leave me alone for 30 or 40 minutes, at which point he would run back and run into the house, just before our parents got home from work. It was harmless. I didn't mind being home alone because I could do whatever I wanted, eat some snacks, all that good stuff. But about 5 minutes after sitting on the couch with my juice box and gummies, there's a knock on the door. I immediately froze and set about disappearing into the cushions. I remember trying hard not to wet my pants. I have to remind you that I was 6 or maybe 7 at the time, so it shouldn't have been a surprise. Fortunately, I knew better than to open the door, so I did the only thing that made sense and pretended no one was home, so whoever it was would be out shortly. That made sense, didn't it? But that's not what happened. The person behind the door kept knocking. They were aggressive knocks, which took me back to the first time Hugo came to the house. I knew something was wrong and I knew it was him, so I didn't even bother to look out the window. I just kept sitting on the couch until finally, to my relief, he stopped. He had been watching the clock on the radio for 9 minutes, and it passed as he knocked on the door, even more than that first time. Hugo was truly unhinged, and the worst part was that he didn't leave. I remained completely terrified as I watched him creep around the other side of the house, checking the dining room window, the biggest one I can ever remember. My throat almost closed completely in anxiety when I heard it open and felt the warm air coming in from the yard hit my face. He leaned over and looked into the living room, and at that moment we looked into each other's eyes. He held up a single hand and then waved at me like I was a puppet or something, then gave me that awful smile and said, "Hey, Mom and Dad aren't home yet, are they?" I didn't say anything. Then he crawled the rest of the way through the window frame. I was so terrified I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle. Even with him inside the house, I wasn't able to move to even run. To this day, that was the most terrifying experience of my life. I couldn't see what he was doing as he moved through the house, somewhere down the hallway across the dining room. The only things down there were Max's bedroom and my parents' bedroom, and finally the front door leading outside. He never went back to the living room, which was where I was, so whatever he wanted to look for inside our house, he was inside those rooms. After standing there for quite a while, he finally came back and greeted me. He did it the same way he did at the beginning, that is, waving his arm like a puppet. But this time he waved goodbye, and then slid back down the hallway. I'll never forget watching his arm snake around with his t-shirt in his hand, wiping all his footprints behind him before closing the window. He knew I was just a kid, and that it was possible no one would believe me, and I think he was actually counting on that. Finally, my brother came home to find me in hysterics on the couch. I started shaking after he left out of fear. I spilled my juice box on the couch, which made me think even more that I was now in more trouble. I told him what had happened, or tried to, and watched his face twist in worry and panic. He finally understood what I was saying. Hugo came in, knocked on the door before he came through the kitchen window into the house, and he touched you. Max interrupted me with visible fear on his face. I shook my head and he nodded, then ran to the phone, called my dad, and before I knew it, both parents were walking in the front door. They questioned me pretty thoroughly. I started to explain about the spilled juice, but all they wanted to know was what happened with Hugo. Finally, my dad asked me which window I had come in through, and I pointed to the kitchen window. He felt it, and then asked me which way I had gone in the hallway. And I told him towards the bedrooms and pointed exactly where he went. He, just like Max, asked me if he had done anything to me, and I again shook my head, just told him about the greeting and what he did with his shirt as he went out the window again. My parents and Max shared a look and then quietly agreed to go check their rooms. They understood. He must have gone into one of their rooms. A few minutes later, I heard Max make this strange gagging sound, and our parents quickly rushed to his room. At the time, I really wasn't sure what they found, or what grossed Max out so much that it made him want to throw up. But then they saw that there was some kind of weird stuff of his missing used underwear, a hairbrush, pictures of his corkboard, among other kinds of creepy, super creepy stuff. After this, my dad called Hugo non-stop for the next 24 hours, but never got him to answer. He never came for the car, never paid us, never picked it up. It was all a scam, just to get close to my brother. A few years later, when I was in high school, I came across a story in the newspaper, underneath which was a large picture of Hugo, which wasn't even his real name. This man had been caught and put in prison for crimes related to child molestation, sexual harassment, and trespassing. After the incident at the house, my parents called the police and gave them a detailed report of his actions, but we never saw him again, and the police never caught him, until I saw this story in the newspaper 10 years later.